It's Wednesday, June 13th, 2018, just about noon Eastern Time, and this is Higher Ed Special Edition. I'm your host, Andrea Boyle-Tippett from the University of Delaware. Welcome to today's episode where we'll chat about something that leaves many of us scratching our heads: digital rumor control. Misinformation can swirl faster than a hurricane on social media. Our guests from Georgia State University will discuss how to protect your institution and keep a cool head at the same time. Their lessons learned will help us all stay ahead of the rumor mill through social listening and quick response. Today's Higher Ed Special Edition is part of the Higher Ed Live Network. Episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. We encourage you to join the conversation. Share your thoughts and questions via Twitter using hashtag Higher Ed Live. So again, that hashtag is Higher Ed Live for your questions. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. It's time to get serious about your brand positioning. You need research, critical thinking, creative brilliance, and a digital-first strategy. And you need a website that serves as a flagship for your newly articulated brand. How do you get your senior leadership to understand and buy into the time and resources necessary for a branding initiative and website redesign done right? Join M. Stoner's co-founder and co-owner, Voltaire Santos Murin, and their branding partner, BVK, for your free webinar called Pitch Perfect: How to Gain Internal Buy-in, and that's on June 28th at 2 p.m. on the East and 11 a.m. Pacific. The teams will arm you with the tools, the data, the stories, presentation approach, and techniques you'll need to build and deliver a persuasive pitch to your decision makers. We'll be tweeting out a link shortly with registration information. All of our episodes are free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or you can take us with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast. Today's episode is made possible by PRSA's Counselors to Higher Education Professional Interest section. Counselors to Higher Ed provides PR professionals working in colleges and universities with publications, insights into the best ways to promote the value, power, and appropriate role of communications and marketing functions within your institutions, as well as terrific networking opportunities and virtual events. Join us for new connections, fresh ideas, and hot topics at the 2018 CHE West Coast Forum in Portland, Oregon, and that's in early August. After 2 successful years in San Francisco, we're moving the event up the coast to the Pacific Northwest. It is jam-packed with insights and learnings from college presidents, chief diversity officers, and a communicator who used her team's trip to the Sweet 16 to the fullest advantage. So now let's turn to today's guests, Andrea Jones and Terry Coniglio of the Georgia State University. Andrea Jones is the Associate Vice President for Public Relations and Marketing Communications at Georgia State University. A strategic leader, she oversees media relations, crisis communications, content strategy and distribution, social media, photography, video, and internal comms at the university. Andrea joined Georgia State in 2008 after spending a decade as an award-winning investigative journalist with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where she covered higher ed and other topics. Terry Coniglio is the Director of Content Strategy at Georgia State University, where she's led digital and social media for the past 7 years. Before joining Georgia State, she worked at Cornell University and Duke Cooperative Education and taught English in Japan. Terry received a Bachelor of Science degree from Ithaca College and an MBA from Georgia State. Welcome, Andrea and Terry.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
We are so excited to be here.
Sharing our screen and get right into it.
Right into it. So we are super excited to join you guys today to talk a little bit more about digital rumor control and sort of how we all keep our heads above water in the social media environment. So we thought we'd start out with a little bit about Georgia State University. So we're the largest institution in Georgia. We're one of the largest in the country. We've worked really hard to build a national reputation around kind of being a different kind of university and how we're changing things for higher education. And we really have worked hard to get some of these great third-party endorsements. So we're ranked 4th most innovative in the country. But again, we're the largest institution in Georgia. We're ranked highly for undergraduate teaching. And really what we're known for most nationally is our work with student success in the student success arena. So over a decade's time, we raised our graduation rates by 22 percentage points. But as everyone on this webinar knows, all of that can be damaged very quickly in a crisis. So what we're here to talk about is really how you, keep your wits about you when you're faced with crisis situations. So we want to first talk a little bit about the changing media landscape. So this is an image from the Wall Street Journal newsroom, and it shows this giant screen that monitors stories based on the number of clicks that they've received, and it's in real time. So this is a phenomenon that is happening in newsrooms around the country. Most newsrooms now have screens that are pulling in analytics data that are displayed for everyone to see. So editors are really becoming more reliant on Google Analytics reports to help drive traffic. And we all know that newsrooms are shrinking and advertisers are disappearing. Everyone's competing for eyeballs. So it really shouldn't be a surprise that click goals have kind of crept into journalism. This is a quote from an Atlanta reporter from a January story on click goals in News Guild, which is an organization that represents journalists. And you can see that this reporter is talking about the fact that editors are really openly speaking about click goals and to think about the fact, think about what their audiences are wanting and what they're going to click on. And in the same story, a Washington Post reporter was quoted as saying, quote, "Every reporter would love to have the word Trump or Kardashian in the same story all of the time." Anecdotally, we know a producer at WSB-TV, which is Atlanta's largest local television station, and she's told us that the station's quota for clicks is 1.6 million per week on digital content. And as universities, we're really in a unique spot. So, we're not only held accountable for our own brand, so we can't have students waiting in long lines or getting bad customer service or not receiving financial aid, but we're also made up of a community of people. So when our members are doing things good or bad, we really do face questions about their actions. So this is an example at Georgia State where we have a 30-year-old man from a suburb of Atlanta who has made national headlines for booking the white nationalist Richard Spencer. And in every single story where this individual is recognized, every single headline calls him out as a Georgia State student. We're all aware that there's this national trend in higher ed where social media users are going after institutions when members of their community are posting things, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But we feel strongly that you need to have these repeated and open conversations about free speech, and also really think about the appropriate responses to inquiries when we get them. So how do we do that?
So one thing that we really pay attention to is the social media ripple effect. And when a lot of these situations arise, we first see it starting on social. So we want to look for the source. What is that tweet zero? And get at that right away. Is it misinformation that we can correct and stop it right there before it kind of goes to that next level of going viral? And as we all know with social media, everyone has the potential to go viral and be a publisher, but what they're saying isn't necessarily true. So it's our job to make sure that we're continually monitoring that conversation and as quickly as possible stopping misinformation before it gets to the next level, which is the local media. And if it's a slow news day, we don't want it to get even further to the national media. So the quicker we can stop it at that source and social media level and keep it within our community, the better off we're going to be. So some of the ways that we do that, we're constantly monitoring. We do use a program called HootSuite. We have over 200 streams set up where we monitor everything from hashtags to geolocations to lists of particular users. And this year we moved everyone into the same enterprise account so that when we do see something come up on social, whether it be a crisis situation or a customer service issue, we can assign that to the right person to handle. So you can see in the first stream there, the orange box over that tweet. That was assigned to someone in financial aid. So the right person is handling the situation as quickly as possible. We also use another monitoring system that can monitor the broader general conversation. And this can give us really great reports on how many tweets we've gotten, how many Facebook posts, and measuring the sentiment of that. And we're continually doing this on a day-to-day basis when we don't have anything breaking, good or bad, so that when we're in the situation of a crisis, we have a benchmark of what a normal day looks like.
And so we're all sort of thinking about when you can't control tweet zero and you know that this is something that's going to keep going, what's the mantra that you're telling yourself? So this is a great quote from Warren Buffett that's actually 25 years old, but I think really still rings true, and in fact rings more true in the social media age. So we want to get it right, we want to get it fast, we want to get it out, and we want to get it over with. It takes 25 years to build a reputation, Buffett has said, and it only takes 25 minutes to destroy it. And we would argue in the social media world, it can be 5 seconds. So there are a lot of common mistakes that folks make when dealing with crisis. Not jumping on it and being timely. And again, that goes to Terry's point of constantly monitoring to know when things are bubbling up, not recognizing how severe an incident actually is, and then not showing empathy. So if a leader doesn't understand the sentiment behind what's happening, if students are disappointed, if students are angry, really making sure that we understand what's behind the context of the crisis is really important to us. Then an inconsistency in messaging. So what we've done at Georgia State is we've stopped the other accounts around the institution from responding to crises. So they come to Central first. So nobody ever tweets or responds to a crisis. They know that the Central accounts will be the first responders. But that's often a common issue at large organizations where a subunit may think, oh, this is just localized to me, and respond instead, and that message is inconsistent as the crisis continues. And then,
Andrea, can I interrupt you there? What does that escalation look like? And because I've found that we do the same thing here at the University of Delaware, but oftentimes a crisis results from what people think might be an innocuous comment that they're replying to. Do you have kind of a standard, or you give people a sense of what sort of things are going to raise to that level? Because I feel like oftentimes people want to defend their piece of the organization if someone's saying something negative.
I definitely see where you're coming from. For us, it has been a matter of, Andrea and I have both been here a long time and have built up a reputation around campus, where anytime anyone new comes in that's managing a social media account, they have to meet with us first. We go through these policies and procedures, and that's just one of our big don'ts. And that if you have any questions, to come to us first. So it is really about hitting the ground running and having that relationship and that trust with them to know that no matter how big or small they might think the incident is, they can come to us and we'll guide them on that response. And so we've had everything from trolls to things that are political. And a lot of times we can just deal with it very quickly. Sometimes we escalate it to legal, but just making sure that they know that we have their back and we should be their first stop.
Right. And so, for example, we had a student who tweeted out a picture of a moldy burrito that she was served out of one of our vending machines, and our vending services folks saw it and came to us, and we responded from the university level rather than having dining services respond. Yeah. And that speaks to the next point, which is really thinking about the media and how you talk to the media. So we feel strongly that when one of these situations escalates, that the person at ground zero does the media interviews. So we do a lot of media training. I've been here 10 years. I've only been on the local television once. We've had many stories and many crises, but we feel strongly that the face of the incident should be the person who oversees the area. So, for example, with the dining services issue, we would put the head of dining services out on the media, and we would help them craft the responses. We're doing the media training on the side, but we feel like they need to be the face of whatever our incidents are. We've done that with housing, we've done that with police. We do that. We feel strongly that that's really important to make sure that that the person at the center of the crisis does the media response. And then the other thing, we really feel like the most important thing you can do is, and I'm sure, again, most everyone in this call has done this as well, is establish the chain of command. So for us, it's that oftentimes the social team or someone around the university will see a post or will be alerted by the media. That comes in centrally to us. We'll work with legal or other relevant offices. So if it's student affairs, if it's police, no matter what the issue is, we try and pull in the relevant groups. And then oftentimes either we or legal, depending on what the situation is, will let the president, and oftentimes the system office, we're one of 28 public institutions in Georgia. So if it's something that we feel like the system overall needs to be aware of, we'll let the system know about it. And then we try and get the folks that are the core group of people in the room together, so that get the stakeholders together, determine the course of action, and then it comes back to us for distribution and monitoring. And then we're going to continue to monitor using HootSuite and our other tools throughout the course of a crisis.
We also are always using the data we have to build our case to help influence the decisions that need to be made in the moment. So this is where it's important to constantly be monitoring and reporting, even when there isn't a crisis or a positive story going on, so that you have those benchmarks and that you can see and prove your point that on a normal day, we might only get a couple hundred tweets, but today we got 3,000 tweets and it shifted our sentiment from positive to negative. That kind of visual, those kind of numbers can really put it into context for leaders who might not be on social, who might not understand the ramifications of getting 10,000 tweets in one day. Oftentimes at a university our size, who cares if we got 10,000 tweets? We have 50,000 students. So being able to put that into perspective of what we would see on a normal day and then how the sentiment around the organization has changed can make a big impact in making decisions to act quickly and move forward.
Yeah, and then we feel strongly that when you are in the room with the stakeholders, that we as the public relations folks really need to be prepared to stand our ground. Oftentimes the attorneys are going to want to say as little as possible, and that's their job, and we absolutely respect the attorney here. But we want to make sure that the other offices, again, whether it's police or student affairs or the other offices around the institution, are helping to add the context to our university policies. And then oftentimes, we're prepared to help legal understand that there's often a middle ground between how this would play out in the court of law and how it plays out in the court of public opinion. And again, in this 24/7 social media environment, being responsive, saying the right thing at the right time is really important. For us, it's knowing what our institution who our institution is and what we stand for. We do a lot of practice when we're not in crisis mode. And I think that's something that's smart for everybody to do. So if you see, many of us have been through many, many crises. And so as you see one of these stories pop up in the news, maybe gather your team together and think about how would we have responded? How would we have handled the situation? It's a lot easier to do that when you are not in the hot seat. And so those are good learning experiences. And, I think for us, it's really great to create templates. But when you're in this shifting world where templates don't always work, so we're always trying to think about the broad issues, free speech, safety, fraud, and who we would put in the room to address these. And so we thought we'd talk a little bit about a non-higher education company and a crisis that they faced recently. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with the Starbucks case. So the Starbucks incident started on a Thursday when a customer posted a video of two African-American men being arrested. This customer posted the video at like 5 o'clock in the evening. The men were supposed to be meeting a colleague and they were arrested when they were asking to use the bathroom and they refused to leave. So this was kind of a slow burn. It started out with about 100,000 views and then it really caught fire over Friday night. By the end of this whole incident, the woman who posted this was famous. The video was viewed over 11 million times and the company was in full crisis mode. So on Saturday morning, this started to escalate. So Starbucks put out an initial tweet that was an apology. And then the police commissioner of Philadelphia ended up making a 10-minute long Facebook Live where he actually said in the Facebook Live that, quote, officers did nothing wrong. So that ended up with 750,000 views. And most of the sentiment around that was anger, people disagreeing with him. And that was around the time that the boycott Starbucks hashtag started, which ended up receiving more than 100,000 mentions. The mayor started to call for action. It continues to escalate into Sunday. And on Sunday, you saw a much stronger response from the CEO of Starbucks. So it was a somber video, an apology, a stronger statement. They called this incident reprehensible. And on Monday, the CEO did the national media rounds. Tuesday, they announced they would close all 8,000 stores for 175,000 employees at a cost that's estimated around $7 million. So as all of this was happening, we were having an internal discussion around policy change. So, we had the CEO apologizing, calling this reprehensible. We have the store shut down, but the policy at the root of this was the bathroom issue. And so sure enough, a month later, Starbucks did announce on Friday, May 11th, that they were going to change this bathroom policy. So the question is, could they have stopped some of this huge national media wave had they changed that bathroom policy in the days after April 12th instead of waiting a month to make that change? It's just an interesting thing to think about.
So we also wanted to walk you through a situation that we had where we were able to affect some policy change in the midst of a crisis. So in the late fall, early winter of 2015, we had a rash of robberies inside our library. We're an urban institution in downtown. Our students have maybe a higher tolerance for safety than some other campuses. They understand that you have to be on guard and on the lookout, but the library should be a safe place where that doesn't happen. So the community was very on edge. We saw that social ripple. It got to the local media. And on January 28th, going into the spring semester of the next year, 2 students were robbed at gunpoint in the library. And our police felt like this was a police issue, not a university reputation issue. But we were, as you can imagine, seeing this all over social as an unacceptable way for our university to behave from our students, as well as it getting out to the local media. So we knew that we needed to take some stronger action. And the day that this happened, where we had those 2 shootings robbery, not shooting, sorry. There was a gun involved, not shot. By 11 a.m., we got this email out from our president that explained exactly what we were going to do, how we were going to make some changes in the police units around the library, how we were going to better secure the entrances and exits, and in the short term, close the library to the public while we implemented some of these changes. An important thing we also did at this point was try to remove the conversation from social so that we could get a better control over it. This situation was something that we also felt strongly about. We want our students to be safe on campus. We want these changes to happen. So in the email and on our website and on social, we included a link to a feedback form that allowed our community to give us their thoughts, feelings, suggestions in a private way that we could take into account, categorize them, and return that back to leadership. We also then held some safety forums where our community could come and speak directly to the leadership about these issues and about changes that were going to be made. But
so we thought we were doing great. We moved the conversation off social. People were starting to feel better. And and then a month later, we had a completely unrelated police incident, that occurred in the parking lot of one of our dorms. So it turned out there was a student in the dorm that was going out to sell drugs to a couple of guys in the parking lot. They ended up in a shootout. Nobody was killed. But this happened around 10 at night, right before the 11 o'clock news. And it happened at a dorm that has a huge balcony. And so all of the students were out looking over the parking lot as the police were there. All the television stations were there. We had wall-to-wall coverage that night. But what we did wrong, what was really, in hindsight, what we should have done was put out communication. But police felt like because this was not an ongoing incident, it didn't trigger the Clery Act report. And so we didn't put out communication because it was an incident that was closed over. There was no ongoing threat to campus. And so, not surprisingly, we started to see, the conversation on social really escalate overnight. And when we came in the next morning and we gathered our stakeholders together, we talked about, what is the response? So we put out a strong statement from the president that next morning where he was expressing outrage. We took responsibility for the lack of communication the night before, and we announced a change in leadership for our police department that day. And so since then, we've hired a longtime Atlanta assistant police chief. He was at the Atlanta Police Department. He's done a lot of upgrades to the police department. So this is, again, enacting some policy changes that have really changed the police department and changed safety around Georgia State. So we moved officers out of the cars. We shifted investigative units. We started this new homeless outreach and engagement team and created a lot more communications channels. So we're informing our community more about what's going on. We've also seen a dramatic decrease in crime around Georgia State. And that's, again, a real testament to the police and the police work that they're doing.
So we wanted to shift the conversation a little bit and hopefully spark some discussion. Please tweet any questions or stories that you have around this as well. So free speech is something that has become a big issue for us on social. We've often see people tweeting us or sending us Facebook messages of a screenshot of a student, an alum, a faculty, a staff member, some member of our community that has made a comment or post on social media that they disagree with, that they might find offensive, racist, homophobic, and they are demanding that the university take some action, expel the student, fire the employee. But oftentimes these statements, while we might not agree with them, they don't violate a student code of conduct, an employee code of conduct, or a technology usage code of conduct. So there's not much that we can do. And as a public institution, we don't want to be seen as hindering free speech. So we take these seriously and evaluate each one, but there's oftentimes not a lot that we can do. And I imagine that many of you are also facing this, and we'd love to hear some of your stories.
And so one of the things at Georgia State that we've done after we've had a couple of these free speech incidents is talk about the difference between tolerate and condone. So, we as an institution don't condone certain type of language, but we do tolerate that type of language because, again, it's not in violation of the law or of our own codes of conduct. And so that's something that, because we've seen an increase in these kinds of tweets and this kind of social media rhetoric, that we have had a discussion around the table about, this doesn't represent who the university is and we don't condone it, but, we will not say we don't tolerate it because that is going too far, because we do tolerate it because it's within the free speech laws. So,
and nor can we police the internet behavior of all of our alums.
That is true too, yes. So we're curious to hear from others if that's something that y'all have seen an uptick in, because we've definitely seen an uptick in it.
Well, I have a question about the tolerate versus condone. How have you, so you communicated that versus via your channels. Have you had any conversations with the student life, dean of students office to get that? We've had some, in certain instances, kind of teamed up with them and worked with them on the trainings that they are offering, because we're all kind of thinking about these things in tandem, right? So we'll go to them and they'll say, well, we're already going to offer this in the fall, blah, blah, blah. Have you done things on that line?
So the university system did a free speech training that managers from each institution were required to do, and it hit on a lot of these points. And we do regularly talk to the dean of students office. And again, because we're looking, if we see something, we may pass it along they'll look at it along with legal affairs on whether or not it violates the student. Does it constitute hate speech or something like that? So we're looking at them on kind of individual basis, but then we're having, yes, the larger, broader conversations around this topic in general, and trying to educate students about the fact that just because something may be offensive to you doesn't mean that a student is going to be expelled for saying it. So yeah, we're working on that as well.
Yeah, and I would be interested if anyone else chimes in about that idea, because there was something in the Chronicle earlier this year about a Gallup poll that was done, and it seems like, and this is what I've seen play out, is that students are really pro free speech in theory, but then in practice they go a different direction. And I think it's just, not every 18-year-old understands constitutional law the way constitutional lawyers might, right? So I'm interested in hearing if other schools have done anything to kind of, like you said, your system had some information on free speech, which I think is great. Is that something that still lives online and can be pointed to?
Yeah, I think I'll check and see, but I think it's on the system's website. Yeah.
Okay, great. We do have a question that came in from Twitter. Actually, two questions from Laura Barron. The first is, what do you suggest in terms of institutional social media policies and guidelines?
So we have our policies and guidelines and best practices, because social is always shifting. So as far as our don'ts are relatively small, because we want people to be able to adapt to changes in the platforms without having to update these policies. But one of our big number one don't is in a crisis situation, don't post anything, and having everyone in one system really, really helps. So we have single sign-on to Hootsuite right now. So they know if they go and say anything, I can revoke their access. And I know exactly who has said it because it's tied to their name, not just their account. As well as if they see something, they can assign it to me and get it off of their plate so they don't have that responsibility.
Well, and the other don't is don't delete comments.
Yes, yes. That goes back to the free speech issue. That's been another one. And that's always when a department is first getting on to social media or a new chair or dean, they're always like, oh, people will comment. Like, yes, people will comment. But even if it's something you don't like, you have to keep it. And it's better to have a comment response plan than to delete those comments because they're just going to come back stronger when you delete them.
What about if they're unrelated comments? If they're about a different topic and they're going back on old posts and posting?
Wildly off topic, we can delete it, but it has to be pretty wildly off topic.
Okay.
We've faced a couple of those.
Yeah.
So we had about a year. We made a decision as a university to move. We allowed our radio station to be moved to the local PBS station, and a lot of our community was upset about that. And so we were seeing a lot of posts on pretty much every social media post that we made. People were making comments about the WRS decision.
It was also during the Ebola outbreak. So one of my favorites was we were posting a lot of stuff about our Ebola research, and people were like, why are you wasting your time with Ebola? Save WRS.
But we left it. We left it. So just kind of hunkered down and left it.
Yeah, we put our statement out that we were allowed to put out. And that's one of those that what we wanted wasn't in line with what the users wanted, and there was nothing we could do. When it comes to safety, of course we want our community to be safe, but this decision was made and we had to weather the storm.
You said everyone's in Hootsuite. How did you make that happen?
So we had a policy change based on our customer service issues that we were facing. So that's what drove that initiative. But it also, the benefits go beyond customer service to security, to being able to provide better content. So we are able to produce content at a central level where we have more resources, writers, photographers, videographers, and provide it in the content library for people to use. So the people around campus whose social is just a small part of their job, they have access to that higher level content to share out, as well as they don't have to feel the pressure in these crisis situations and these customer service situations around that we know that we're there to help them and support them. And as well as it better serves the students because the right person is answering their question instead of me or my team who we don't have any access to financial aid information or class information. So it's made a big difference in the way that we serve our student body.
Two other additional questions. Did you get pushback, and do you require the units to pay for access to Hootsuite?
So we didn't really get a ton of pushback. I think there is a learning curve on it, and you've got a lot more resources. And as far as funding goes, it's a combination. And so I'm happy to have like an offline discussion about that and how we move that if anyone's interested.
Great. There was a second question from Laura Barron, and she said, from your experience, how do you recommend PSE institutions' central Marcom teams monitor and manage when sub-accounts establish social media accounts?
So that's a hard one because they creep up all the time. It's a never-ending thing. So we have on our comm kit, a form that people have to fill out that it comes to us. But a lot of times people don't even realize that there is a form or that they need to come to us. So it is just a matter of monitoring the conversation, seeing what's out there. When these new accounts pop up, they want to grow, so they'll start tagging you, so you'll start seeing them. We reach out to them, bring them in, give them the guidelines, give them the tools, but that is a never-ending process of just always monitoring and making sure that we've got a handle on it, and it's not perfect.
But Terry's really built up in the time since he's been here a real trust with folks around the institutions. They look to her for guidance and advice. So that's been a big help for us too, that she's invited in to go give her expertise, and people are willing to listen and work with us, which has been terrific.
What system did you use? You showed the sentiment gauge. What system do you use for that?
So that is HootSuite Insights.
Oh, okay.
Another product, but it's very similar to a Radiant 6 or a Brand Watch.
Okay. I have a bunch more questions. What about your workflow has changed from, and not to get political, but I think it's fair to say that things are different than they were before the last election. What about your workflow has changed there?
I think it's pretty much the same. I mean, I think for us, being cognizant of what some of the statewide issues are for higher education. I think for us, it's also, again, like I mentioned, kind of keeping the university system informed about what we do. We're not a particularly political institution, so we're a public university as opposed to a private university. And so, our president does not make a lot of statements on different things, and his sort of policy is, until something is legislation, until legislation passes, it's not something that we're going to comment on as an institution. So, we look for a lot of direction from the system. We have a lot of conversations with faculty. We do media training. We talk about, sort of talking about your own personal opinion on social, and which is, of course, okay for faculty, but making sure that you're not acting on behalf of the university. So we talk a lot about the difference of that. So, I mean, I think it's just heightened everybody's kind of awareness of social.
And I do think there is a little bit of a disconnect between our audience's expectations sometimes in those situations and what happens, if our audience expects us to put out a statement or do something very strong, in reaction to something that has happened politically. And so we will sometimes get a little bit of that push because they might see other businesses or institutions doing that, and we're not going to.
Yeah.
And is that the yardstick that you use? Because we get a lot of that too, that calls for statements about things. Some things make complete sense. Safety is always is a no-brainer, but things like that aren't even happening on our campus. There's a bombing somewhere in Europe, and we don't have any students studying abroad. And we look at it, and we have one student from that area, and our international student body, our international student office, has reached out to that particular student. And so, is there a yardstick? Like you said, your president feels like if it's not legislation, but then there's things that fall outside of legislation as well.
I think unless it directly affects our community, and I think Terry's sort of enacted that policy. So if there's a school shooting or something,
right. Boston Marathon bombing, we had no connection. And so we don't want to look like on social, we're just trying to tag on to the tragedy of the moment by throwing in a condolence or an opinion, because it doesn't make sense. So our policy in those situations are stay quiet if we are not involved, but understand the broader context of what's going on the internet that day. So that's probably not the day to be like, hey, it's donut day, like, celebrate. So be mindful of how you are behaving, but you don't have to participate in every conversation that is trending.
Yep.
How about as a situation unfolds or keeps going for several days, what do you do about kind of quelling people's fears? I've noticed that internally, right? Like people are on board with the original response, and then as they start to get calls or emails themselves, they get more and more uncomfortable and want more. Can you give some advice for that?
Yeah. So one of the things that we try to do, and we've learned this through many crises, is to put kind of a running statement on either our homepage or our news hub, so that as new information evolves, it's all kept in a central place. And then all of our periphery units or the dean or whoever needs to share that information has a simple URL to be able to share out the latest information. Because as we all know, the conversation on social there are rumors, there are things that are untrue. And so we want to keep our central statements in an easy place to access so that we can always be sharing that URL. And then too, I think when we see something that is misinformation, or we see something that is absolutely wrong, we will go in and talk to folks about it. Yeah.
And the benefit of doing that in a central place that you're linking to is we've also seen the first thing that you say about it, which you need to say as quickly as possible, and you might not have all of the information, is what's going to be shared the most, paid attention to the most. As the situation starts to resolve itself, it's much less interesting to the internet. And so the retweets, the conversation around it just starts to die a little bit. But even after the situation is resolved, people tend to come across that original exchange or that original tweet. So if that link is constantly being updated with the most information, you're going to have that out there in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm. Oh, to that link, I know, Andrea, you have the luxury of having an internal communications team, or at least a person, which I know a lot of people don't have the luxury of, including us. How do you use those internal channels to communicate what's going on in a crisis? Maybe not so immediate, but as things unfold.
Yeah, I mean, I think we sort of, in crisis mode, we think of our internal, it's all kind of one. So whatever we're pushing out on the homepage, whatever we're pushing out on social,
is going to be screenshotted and put on the news and printed.
Right.
So it's not internal anymore.
Right. So we think of every if we're going to communicate internally, we're assuming that is going to end up on the news. So we're never telling our internal community something that we wouldn't want the rest of the community to hear. And so really, there's not really an internal versus an external message for crisis. And I am trying to think, I don't think we've really, again, we produce the reports. So Terry's team does a terrific job of gathering those analytics. So at the next time, at the leadership council or admin council or something, we might distribute that out so that people could see, here's what happened, kind of a postmortem. But that wouldn't be something that we would distribute broadly. We've had situations where it's something that's college specific. And so we'll talk specifically to the dean and the communications director in that college and try to give them some more information and context. And oftentimes, the colleges may put out a little bit more information. So we are kind of handling the overall crisis communication. And then if the dean wants to go a little bit farther within an individual college, that's up to the dean. But again, we assume that whatever is being communicated to our faculty and staff is as good as being communicated to the news media and our external audiences.
Sure, absolutely. I wondered just if you had like an internal email or, a daily email or something, if maybe in addition to including the things people need to know and about parking or whatever, and the good stories going on, if it also included, hey, this bad thing is happening and here's the university's response.
We really haven't done anything internal specific. We usually just, we train people to go to the homepage, and I think that's where we usually.
Okay. And so what about like university-wide statements and emails to and in emails to students? We hear sometimes, well, I want a statement and I want to hear it from the president. I want the president to email me. From students, from faculty, from staff. Do you go that route, or do you stick specifically to social and the website?
No. So I think it depends on what the situation is. So if it makes sense, so I'm thinking of, we have a situation every year where we have a group of street preachers that come and
use our free speech space.
Right, yeah, and are very loud and vocal. So that makes sense that our senior vice president over student affairs responds to students because he talks to students about free speech. So that's one where it doesn't come from our president, but it comes from the leader who oversees students and oversees the free speech policy for students. So it kind of depends on what the situation is, but we will be advocates to escalate up to a presidential response if we're in crisis where we feel like it needs to come from him. So again, like if we're if it's an armed robbery on campus, if it's one, our police chief may put out something. But we all, that's part of that stakeholder meeting to talk about who's the voice.
And there have been times where we have just addressed it on social via camera. 7585.
Yes. So we had a.
Sorry, your eye roll was great.
So we're just gonna keep talking about all of our crises.
Got a lot of experience, as I'm sure all of you have.
Yeah. So we had an art project where students made homemade cameras, and they were like time-lapse cameras that used the sun. And one of them
put it in a really public place.
Right, and then it was called in as a bomb threat,
suspicious
package, and then it shut down the interstate for a few hours.
During rush hour.
During rush hour.
Yeah.
And we see the
in Atlanta, where your traffic is ridiculous.
The interstate being shut down, and it's a couple miles north of us, and we're like, phew, good thing that's not us. And then we get the phone call like, yeah, it's towards the art project.
Yes.
So we very quickly got a statement out on social, and it really was an innocent thing. You know, the student was doing the assignment, didn't realize they needed permission. And I think it was one of the ones that we were able to laugh about, you know, quicker than some of the others. But that was a time where it was over and done.
Yeah. And the head of
got it out on social.
And the head of the department did all the media the next day and was super apologetic and said, we're so sorry. And next time we're going to go make these homemade cameras. We're going to be a little more thoughtful about where we put them up. So
it's funnily enough, I have a very parallel story with the engineers and them needing, I can't remember what it was, but it involved having a PVC pipe that was capped on both ends. So it looked like a pipe bomb. And at the end of the time, when the project was over, one of the students threw it in the dumpster, and then someone emptying the trash thought it was a bomb. And we luckily did not shut down the interstate, but it was the exact same thing. And so to make you feel better, we responded exactly the same way. We kept it on social, and the chief of police did all the interviews immediately. And we just, you know, kind of took care of it that way.
Say you're sorry. You know, and that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, exactly. We do have another question from Twitter, and the question is, what would be VIP priorities for small teams or solo people in charge of social media monitoring and management?
Setting up some kind of system where you've got alerts coming to your phone when you hit a certain cap, so that you can sleep at night, because I was a team of one for a long time, and I know what that's like, that pressure of just like, oh my God, waking up and having like 50 tweets on your phone, like, is this good or bad? And yeah, it's hard, it's stressful. And we have gone through so many of these. I think especially that WRIS one where we couldn't do anything. And at that time I was a team of one, and we were getting for 3 months straight, it was like an average of like 2 tweets a minute. Like it worked out to for 3 months straight. And at that point is when I was able to finally let go a little bit of being like, okay, you know what? I don't need to look at this at 2 a.m. and I wake up in the middle of the night. Like it's going to be okay. But being, you know, having those systems automated and those reports automated so that when you do get in first thing in the morning, you can quickly open them up and see exactly the landscape that you're looking at and what happened overnight.
Maybe calendars too.
And content calendars, making sure that, you know, everyone is on board with that and that everything's going out to all of the different channels and maximizing that content, and being able to reframe it for social.
Yeah.
Where our content priorities are.
Yeah, we've worked a lot to get designers, writers, photographers, everybody thinking kind of channel agnostic. So, okay, I'm the designer for the magazine, but I'm also thinking about, how is this going to play on social? And so kind of, even if you may be the one social person, but bringing in your colleagues and helping them understand, again, using analytics, that, wow, if we, reframe this magazine story and push it out on Instagram and Instagram stories, we could really get a big boost in the number of people that are viewing it. And then also delivering those metrics back to other team members who are not on socials so that they can understand how they can make their work go farther. So the writers feel better about, wow, I, rewrote this for social and it did really well. So kind of rallying other troops that are not, where social is not their primary focus, so that they can feel like they're a part of that team as well.
We do make sure that everything we share has a UTM code attached to that link so that we know exactly where that traffic is coming from, so we can see where our efforts need to be spent.
I'm sorry for my naivete. I don't know what a UTM code is.
So that's just some extra code that you can put in your link shortener. So when you click on a link on the internet and you see in your bar that you've got the web page and then it's like source, medium, and kind of, a lot of numbers and funny characters, we're adding that to every link so that we know exactly where traffic is coming from and who is responsible for that traffic. So we can see what's working, what's not working across our different channels and platforms. And I like to talk about it. You make Thanksgiving dinner and spend all day on Thanksgiving dinner, and it's this big turkey, and you eat it in 20 minutes and it's gone. but then you have leftovers. And so looking at your other distribution channels as maximizing that content and getting your turkey soup and your turkey sandwich the next day out of it is really important.
Okay. As you're talking before about being channel agnostic, I was thinking about the crisis piece as well. I was thinking about the multimedia that you have to include to make sure that your messages are actually seen and heard and read. And we had an instance where we had a crisis that was unfolding on Twitter, and we responded to it on Twitter, and we put our statement, and then we started to make this our standard. We made a graphic of our statement rather than having our statement either written out or being pushed to a link immediately. I get your point, particularly about having it on a certain link there, but we put it on a graphic so it can't be parsed out. When it's reshared, it's there. And I was thinking the same about the videos that Starbucks put out. You basically share the video as is. You can cut it up, but most people are sharing it as is. Do you take those different routes for the different channels to ensure that your message is contained or at least not reframed as much as possible?
We haven't done a ton of that. I have seen other institutions do that. We definitely prioritize speed first and pulling everyone together to get that information back on the web as quickly as possible. But no, I think it's a great idea. But yeah, it's been about speed for us and getting the message out there as quickly as possible.
Sure. If it's happening at 1 o'clock during a regular business day, we could run over to the graphic designer and be like, hey, make this look pretty. Usually it's like 10 o'clock on a Friday night, trying to get everybody on the phone.
Oh, yeah.
Crisis, like an active shooter on campus, the first initial message is actually not going to come from us. It's going to come from emergency management.
Yeah.
Our website, our main social channels, an email, a text, digital signs across campus, indoor, outdoor speaker is all connected to our emergency notification system. So the first tweet, tornado, shelter in place, is going to come from them and from that system. And so speed is the priority. Then we take over with follow-up communication.
Sure. And the situation I described with the graphic is more of a issues crisis versus an emergency, right? So, and we also have the template is accessible by several of our designers, and so you can remotely, and so we can kind of go with it that way, which we found has been helpful.
Yeah, in those situations, we have used pictures of the president or pictures of the building versus spending a lot of time with graphics. But yeah.
Well, I think that we're out of questions and out of time. So I just want to thank both of you. Thank you, Andrea Jones and Terry Coniglio, for joining us.
It was super fun. Thanks so much for having us.
And thanks as always to our program sponsor, PRSA's Counselors to Higher Education. Don't forget to follow and engage with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And come learn with us in Portland, Oregon, August 6th and 7th at our West Coast Forum. We appreciate you joining us today for this special edition of Higher Ed Live.
Thank you.